Morning, Kathy and Sudie and Omar. And Fatima's going to
Morning.
be in person. All right.
I figured I'd join you. You look very lonely up here all by yourself.
Morning, Dave. Lila.
Poor Phil's all by himself in an office.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Welcome back, Gina.
Thank you. Sorry, you got disconnected.
Morning, Bob.
Good morning, Phil.
Morning, Damien.
Hey, good morning, Phil.
Good morning, Taryn. Tyson. Joanne.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning, Kevin. Jake.
Good morning.
Morning, Fania.
So Kathy, are you still in Boston mostly? Or
Yeah.
okay. Well, no, I just scheduled my first ever fly up early Monday morning, fly back Monday evening, and I'm not excited about it. I'll let you know how it goes.
Where are you located?
I'm in DC. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, yeah. I've done that in the other direction quite a few times.
I've never let myself, so we will see. And if you never see me again, you know what happened.
You'll be okay.
All right. It looks like we've got a fair number of people here, and we've got the most important people. That'd be Kathy and Jake, I think. But so thanks everybody for joining this unintentional bias insurance advisory subcommittee meeting. As you know, we had a call, I don't know, a month ago to take questions on the exposures. Since we had at that time, since we gave a longer time for the balancing test exposure, it was requested that we wait and have a separate call for questions on the balancing test. I kind of got busy and forgot to get that on the books. And then I got it on the books, and then I had something come up that I had to change it. So I apologize for scheduling this for last Friday and then bumping it to this Friday. That was all because I had something that I couldn't get out of last Friday. But anyway, so now we are here. And again, the purpose of this call is to field any questions that anybody has about the balancing test documents before submitting comments. And after we go through the questions, because I still have a TBD as for the actual time frame to submit the comments on the balancing test and premium race gap document. Then we'll just see if we can come up with a date to get those comments in by, to make sure that people have enough time to reflect on what we discussed today and make any adjustments to their comments as necessary. So with that, unless somebody has any logistical or other questions, I can go ahead and turn it over to anybody who has questions or comments that they want clarity on about the balancing tests. And you can either do your virtual raise hand or just speak.
Why don't I start off? One thing I meant to ask this last time, the document goes back and forth between race gap and and black/white premium gap. I know that semantics only means so much, but I kind of feel like saying race gap sounds like sounds like it's drawing more attention than it needs to. And as I was reading, I just noticed that it goes between the two of those. But I also understand that it's not just black, white. So I thought I'd bring it up.
I think that's mostly me, and going back between those two things, trying for simplicity and stuff. I mean, I think generally speaking, we called it the premium race gap. But again, we looked at the categories that were prevalent in the census data, which was Black, white, Hispanic, and Asian. There were the Black and Hispanic drivers were significantly higher than the white and Asian driver categories. So that's, certainly welcome to thoughts on if that needs to be made clearer or something like that.
I will just say, from my perspective, that I don't care what it's called, and also that it depends on the analysis that we run, whether we group Hispanic and Blacks together, and Asian and whites together. That's typically how to turn it into a binary. But it's also, we should keep in mind that it's based on the 2010 census. As we go to the 2020 census, which we could be doing now, like, it gets more complicated. And so we could make it more complicated. We could still insist on a binary. There's a bunch of different things we could do, and all of them are pretty similar. So they're definitely second or even third order considerations, in my opinion, as long as one of them is chosen. It'll have a similar kind of effect on the overall conversation. So if we stuck to black versus white binary and got that smaller, then a lot of other race gaps would get smaller, is what I mean. So they're highly correlated, these kinds of race gaps. So I don't really care how we define it. We could use 2020 census categories to define it. We could call it something besides a race gap. Any of those things are fine. At a technical level, I don't think it makes much difference at this stage, right? Like this, we're not talking about subtle statistical signals right now. We're talking about very, very strong statistical signals. So it kind of doesn't matter.
This is no fair because I'm not a data science person. So we So far, we've been using the 2010.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't have any opinion. I just, what would be the reason not to use the 2020? Okay.
No,
Well, no, that,
no,
thanks.
we can. We're ready to. We've developed our 2020 BIFSG statistical inference, racial inference engine, and we've tested it against the 2010 one, and they're very, very similar. Obviously, things change because people actually move, but we don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just I'm just saying it's a categorical issue. Like, how do you but it's again second or third order. And in particular, it brings up that question of, well, what is, if we're looking for a binary, what is the binary? Like, how do we define it? What the main big difference is that one of the categories introduced was multiracial, and there's just a lot of people in multiracial. And we can think of that as like people of color generally, and we could just say Black, Hispanic, multiracial in one group and other people in another group. I mean, I'm just saying, like, then we'd have to have that conversation, which I'm happy to do.
Okay. I mean, obviously, it's up to Disney to give the instructions to how they want this done. I just, if you're reading something quickly and you see race gap versus something more scientific-y, I just think it might get attention that's unwarranted, which then we would be able to explain away, not explain away, but there's more there than a 4-letter word, but in a printed thing if someone's not paying attention. But and if this is something that no one else gives a darn about, just someone raise their hand and say, "Shut up, Tom," and I'll move on.
Well, I certainly we can. I'm happy to take that into consideration as we move forward. You know, I think we're doing what we're doing. So, you know, I don't know and frankly, speaking for myself, I'm perfectly comfortable with what we're doing. And so, you know, I recognize there may be reasons to try to avoid drawing attention, but we will keep that in mind as we go forward in this. And if anybody has any great thoughts on how to do that, certainly.
It's a demographic. It's a demographic characteristic, so you could just say it's a premium demographic. Yeah, the demographic that we're looking at though is race.
Okay.
I mean, if you were to it's a broad stroke category, but it's ultimately what it is.
All right. Other questions, comments? Nancy? And Nancy, if you're speaking, I don't hear you, so
Just takes a while to unmute with WebEx.
Okay, there you go.
The proposed balancing test targeted racial premium gaps in private passenger automobile insurance. But there's no definition under the current DC law that defines private passenger automobile insurance. So there's private passenger autos that are written under commercial policies. And so we had that issue just before, because on the bill that was raising the financial responsibility limits, it referred to private passenger autos. And that meant that they wanted us, there was no distinction to take out commercial policy. And so we would like to see something that specifically states that the balancing test does not include a commercial auto policy. And of course, that's not really something that's defined, but that's the question.
Okay, so thanks, Nancy. That's a good point. So as we conclude this, and in case anybody was wondering, I just turned up the volume a little bit on our end. It was a little low, so it was kind of hard for Tim and I to hear Nancy at first. But I will say the current intention is not to do anything sort of by regulatory fiat, rather. If as we move forward to do something with the balancing test, I believe that the proper way for us to do that would be to do that formally through, legislation or regulation, something like that, as opposed to just doing it, under general regulatory authority. So, that's certainly an issue that we can consider and address when we get to the point of developing whatever legislation or other regulatory process that we go through to implement the balancing test.
Thank you. And that was my mic. That was the problem, Phil. I didn't realize my camera had fallen on the floor, so I apologize. And the mic's included with it. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Other questions?
Well, I have a couple questions.
Okay. All right.
This is in response to the letter from the AAA.
Okay. So
If anybody wants to talk to me about that, like Tyson.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, hi. First of all, on the first page, I love all these suggestions. Personally, I mean, I'm not speaking on behalf of DISB at all, but I think that all variables should be comprehensively evaluated. And I love the idea of having principles around that are transparent. I agree that the testing should be done with reliable data. You say industry data here because it's more reliable, clearly, and some insurers don't have as much data as others, and so it might be not as reliable. I will just point out that some of the stuff that we're talking about around the balancing test is, I mean, the high level reason that we introduced the balancing test at all was to allow companies to suggest modifications to the definition of the premium race gap, which I'm just going to use that term now, as long as we're using that term, just to be clear. So, and I think that we still had on the table the notion that a given company could say, we'd like for our company, for this company of ours, to introduce the following factor in defining the premium race gap, and it passes the balancing test for this reason. And so that kind of points to that notion that they'd be using their own data to make their case. But that's, of course, not actually required. So I'm just pointing out that, like, using industry data, sort of agreed upon industry data, is a good idea for reliability and consistency and sort of accessibility for everybody. It's not actually a contradiction from what I was saying earlier, but it is, I think the reason we weren't thinking about it that way was probably because we were allowing for the possibility that companies would be making cases for balancing tests on an individual company basis, which I still maintain is a little bit complicated, and maybe we should just have one definition for the premium race gap for everyone, but it's not up to me. I would like a little bit more explanation from you, Tyson, about why you think the numerator and denominator of the proposed quantitative ratio are not comparable. I also agree that it is a challenge to fix the threshold for this ratio. That is, in fact, the hardest thing. Like, that's why it's not a math question. It's definitely a question for Disby. But we did our best to build something where a numerator and denominator are comparable. So we'd like to hear your explanation of why you think they're not.
Yeah.
And then before you go on, I want to just, because I think this is one idea really, so let me just finish the idea if you don't mind. You suggest on the second page of a qualitative way of thinking about balancing tests, which I could understand why people would defer to that because it's conversational, it's easy to think about. But I think ultimately it comes down to an actual number. And so that's why we're trying to do this kind of precisely. And then finally, I will just say that, like, I'm really interested in the adverse selection conversation, by the way. But the final thing I'll say to this point is that when you say define success, you talk about clear criteria and being necessary to evaluate the effectiveness of the framework. I agree with that, but I also would say that, like, clear definitions of what we're talking about are also required to talk about clear criteria for effectiveness. So I guess what I'm saying to sum it up is that, like, if we're using qualitative tests, for me, that's sort of code for, like, we're not really admitting that there is a number here, that we're actually, like, on the, below the surface coming up with a ratio. So anyway, Tyson, first of all, tell me why you think they're incomparable. And second of all, like, do you agree that, like, a qualitative test actually ends up being translatable into a quantitative test? And, like, if not, what do you think it is?
Yeah, so I mean, go a little mathy here. What are the units of an F test? Like the result of an F test is the unit premium. I believe
Yeah.
it's a ratio of variances, correct?
Right. I mean, right. We want to think about it as, like, I'm not saying it's easy to think about because it's not. Like, we spend a lot of time trying to decide what the numerator and denominator are and, like, what their unit should be to make sense of it. And I'm not going to get it right if I just say it out loud, but, like, yeah, maybe you know it.
Yeah, I mean, I believe the F test. I believe it's a ratio of variances. So what you'd have on the top is a ratio of variances divided by a difference in premium. So it's talking about like some sort of unit I'm not familiar with on the top being divided by premium being a dollar amount. So you'd have like I believe like a small number, like a decimal on the top divided by a dollar amount on the bottom, which produces some sort of like ratio, like a ratio variance per dollar. So that's the point of, like, if you had dollars on the top versus dollars on the bottom, then it's easier to understand like what the scale of such a thing is or to interpret such a number.
Right.
So it's just more of a point of like unit comparison
Sure,
and
fair.
also of the scales of the numbers if it's going to like be within some sort of predictable range where you could interpret instead of threshold.
Yeah, we originally had it as a ratio of variances, actually, and then we changed it. So yeah, now that you're saying that, it makes sense. But Jake has something to add.
Oh, well, now I'm worried that I'm maybe talking about a version that's out of date. But in the version I'm looking at of the balancing test, if for the numerator, if you pass the F test, if you get a critical value on the F test, then what goes in the numerator is actually the change in pseudo R squared from the model without this predictor to the model with this predictor. So what goes in the denominator is a percentage change kind of thing. And what goes, sorry, that's the numerator. In the denominator, you also get a percentage change kind of thing, which is the change in the measured race gap before versus after accounting for this factor as well. So I think the ratio is a percentage over a percentage kind of thing.
And so if it's a percentage over a percentage, then furthermore, you've got a comparison of two things on the top, you got a comparison of two things on the bottom. you divide them, if you're dividing by a percentage, then you could get extraordinarily large numbers. Like if the percentage is 0.01 or something, then you could get an extremely high number out of this ratio. And so I think just like trying to even understand what the scale of this ratio would look like.
Tyson, that'd be a
is
good thing,
challenging.
right? To have a big number would be like, great. You're getting a lot of you're squeezing a lot of information out of this variable, and you're not adding, you're not like just, it's not just a correlation of to race, which, like, you know what I mean? So that would be great. Like, that's why we are having a bound. That's the whole point of the threshold.
Yeah, I don't have an
I do
intuition
want to
about
agree with
such
what
a number. Yeah.
I agree, though, that I don't have a sense now to calibrate this. Like, I don't know what the reasonable range is going to be, and just getting calibrated, because I agree it could get very large, or it could get very small. So, so even though I think it's well defined, like I don't have a sense for what the values will actually be when you do it.
And, well, I mean, yeah, and going back to the first point of your thing, which is that we should do a sort of comprehensive understanding of each rating variable and like think about how each of them may or may not pass. The idea was to get an intuition for what this ratio looks like in reasonable situations by taking factors that we sort of know and understand and seeing how they do with the balancing test. And that would sort of define let's say a boundary of reasonable numbers.
Mhm.
That was the idea anyway.
Okay. So I would say like that's the mathematical side. Then if I like zoom out to like if the position taken against one position taken against like perceived fairness of insurance practices is the lack of transparency and comprehensibility of what's occurring in insurance pricing. You know, I know a little bit of math. I think I was following what was being said. For the non-math people on the call, I would ask, is such a description transparent and understandable to like consumers? Does that build confidence that like, oh yes, now that we're taking this ratio, we are effectively managing insurance and making sure that equity and fairness is achieved? It seems dense, as the insurance practices are. Not dense as in stupid, but dense as in like challenging, like opaque, hard to understand. So I think that would be another just more holistic thing to think about, is a quantitative test like this going to achieve the goal of increasing confidence in like effective regulation for it.
Listen, Tyson, I couldn't agree more with that. The better we can explain this to the public, the better. I mean, in some sense, and part of the motivation for this, and this kind of work is you'll see like the Consumer Reports type journalism where they're like, oh, this person with this credit score and this driving record is charged twice as much as this person with this credit score and this driving record. And I'm not talking about DC in particular here, but that kind of reporting, and you're like, well, that's actually that's not statistics. That's just two people, and it doesn't explain all the other things that are happening, right? And so what you really want to do is be able to say, to explain it to in a place like the Consumer Reports to an educated audience, like here's how we're thinking about it, and this is why this is transparently a good way of thinking about fairness, and here's how fairness is being achieved, and we hope that you agree that this is at least an arguably good approach. And I agree that the balancing test adds a level of complexity to the conversation.
So I can answer your other question then too. And the comment about it being quantitative versus qualitative. The balancing test, a balancing test is a legal concept. Balancing tests are applied in a number of legal contexts. Sat down and had a cup of coffee with a lawyer buddy of mine who walked me through all the things. The person's very informed about how balancing tests are used. In no cases was she aware of any cases where it is a quantitative exercise. So to the degree this is operating in a legal context and balancing test is a legal term, then I think it could lead to confusion of like, how does this compare to, for example, like like weighting evidence that could be entered in based on the usefulness of the case balanced against the potential like adverse effect it would have on the jury's perception of the candidate, or I'm struggling with the word right now. Whenever like a city wants to build a road and knock down private property in order to build the road, like there's a balancing test that's applied for that. So there's a lot of legal context where that works, and you don't have like a number on either side. So I think that was like, I don't recall the degree to which you explained that in the letter, but that was the context of that.
Yeah.
If that
I
helps.
mean, it's really interesting context, Tyson. I appreciate that. And like, certainly I think at this level of like the spirit of the balancing test, we do want to think about it that way, but it's not actually a legal, it's not coming straight from law whatsoever. Number one. Number two, like our job at Orca writ large is to quantify things that once were done by judges without numbers, right? So that's what we do. I'm very comfortable with the notion that we end up with actual hard numbers. And in fact, when the world where everything is algorithmically derived and everything is algorithmically managed, like that's the only way you can do it. So that there's like a way of testing to see whether something is compliant with law. You can't go to a judge every single time and say, what about this? It has to actually be like code friendly. I would just add one more thing, which is that like I've seen that graph before where you have like the color coded sectors where you're talking about the correlation to risk, the correlation to, the race. One of the things that's different about the balancing test as we're suggesting it could work, again, like putting aside for the fact that it's adding a layer of complexity to the whole notion of explainable fairness, is that we want to know whether something adds understanding of risk after all other factors that we've already decided are appropriate are considered. So that's even like a subtlety beyond whether this, I think let me just look at this thing for a second. You have crime scores by zip code as a predictor of property crime rates. That's the thing that's both predictive of risk and also correlated to race, I guess, is the example there. But like imagine that we already are accounting for other things that encode the crime risk part of it, so in some sense we already have a view into that part of the risk. Then adding that would not give us much more predictive power. So I'm not sure it would be up there in that top right quadrant of that plot. You know what I mean? So I'm just saying that it's a simple way. I can understand why in law and with judges, like they look at things like that and try to understand on balance. We want to, protect people, but we also want this information. But like that's not it's not as clean as that, because we're already encoding a bunch of things like driving record and like we're already allowing a bunch of things to be accounted for before considering this last thing being tested by the balancing test. So anyway, I'm just saying it's a little bit more complicated than that by construction, which is another reason that I feel like a qualitative balancing test is not going to get at what exactly what we're trying to get at, if that makes sense to you.
So
I suppose I was going after information. Phil, I thought the intention of this was to be like to go through the legislative process, right?
yeah.
So this would be a matter of going into law. And again, I'm getting outside of actuarial stuff, I'm getting into legal stuff, but there was a degree to which like how does this work with existing rating law and other sectors that we're aware of. So an analytical activity has different constraints on it.
So before we get into more discussion, I will answer Nancy's question. Yes, the Academy has already submitted a comment letter. They submitted a comment letter by our original deadline that I delayed at the last minute. So that's what this discussion is related to. But yeah, I mean,
Thanks, Phil, but it would have been nice to know that what's going on so that we could have reviewed that letter as well. As we
Well,
get on this call, it's
so
meaningless for the rest of us on the call.
Nancy, so,
Yes.
you know, I can tell you that, you know, the purpose of this call was scheduled to see if people had questions. So
Yes.
I think we got to the point where, you know, there did not seem to be other questions coming from industry people. So that's when Kathy asked the question. So it was not an intention to like have a discussion of something that you might have read and joined in on, but you know, that, I mean, I'm still happy to take questions if anybody has any questions about the exposure before they submit their comments. But I think the discussion was helpful, and again, it is what it is. But you know, so
Yeah, I'm sorry if I wasn't supposed to like
That-
start answering questions on this call. That was my bad. I should have asked first. Sorry.
that's okay.
I just
So-
got that letters and I got to read it, Nancy, but I'm happy to read more questions after this call and have more discussions.
But you know, I think that was
Thank
a
you.
useful discussion to help us because I think those are interesting points that we will have to consider as we move forward. You know, so you know, and I hopefully we will continue to get comments that help us shape this into something that that we can implement. But and you know, I think that that discussion did raise some issues that are good ones for us to have heard about on this call before others submit their comments. And so, you know, I think it got to help the benefit of this, of, you know, what we're trying to do, because again, what we're trying to do is give people an opportunity to you know, raise stuff to help in their comments, and hopefully these questions, that discussion will help others as they formulate their or formalize their comments. But but Tyson,
Yeah, I won't spend any more time. I just, I think I just wanted to, I should have clarified at the beginning. I'm here in my capacity as the chair of the American Academy of Actuaries Equity and Fairness Committee. So anything I said wasn't necessarily doesn't represent the views of my employer.
sure.
Thank you for the letter, Tyson. It's very thought provoking and I want to talk further.
Yeah, thanks for reading it and asking the questions. Appreciate it.
I'm not going to pretend I fully understood that whole conversation, but it's very interesting. But it did kind of bring me back to something that I have done a little poking around, but you both will know better. Is there anything else that looks like this out there in the world? I mean, obviously there are algorithms, and there we can do, you know, we can call a balancing test, and I can certainly see a cost benefit analysis, you know, being a balancing test that can be quantified. But are there analogous studies or reviews going on, or have gone on, or is this a and I have no problem with this being a brave new world. I just want to understand it better.
Well, go ahead, Phil.
So I'm not aware of any other insurance regulators looking at something like this. So, you know, but clearly there are other instances where there is analysis looking to quantify differences in demographic data, including race. So, those things go on.
I'll just say that in our work at Orca, working with lawyers actually in a lot of court cases, a lot of the court cases that we work on use something like the premium race gap. Maybe not for race, maybe not, definitely not for insurance premiums necessarily, but like understanding how big a difference there are between groups and then sort of accounting for reasonable discrimination factors. And then saying, well, is this gap still large? And if so, that might be problematic. So that process is so standard that I think you could just say it's what you normally see. In terms of the balancing test, I have never seen a quantitatively defined balancing test, but I'm not saying that they don't exist because the question is always coming down to, well, is this factor a reasonable one to take into account? And so there's always that question of like, how do you balance what you're trying to measure versus the impact you're also trying to measure. Jake, do you know if there's another balancing test, a quantitatively defined balancing test somewhere?
I don't know of one to give as an example.
Okay. I think this was basically inspired by Phil.
I can be blamed for everything. That's fine.
I mean,
will say
it
that
was
a place that
Yeah, go ahead.
that Kathy and I in previous conversations agree on is that there's some like very technical work that is written, like academic work on how to do these things, but it is difficult to bridge the gap between the academic work and the practicality. And yeah, Orca's attempting to do that with these, and it's appreciated that there's a eye towards what could you actually do with it. So
yeah, we want to make it very practical, and that it does become pretty complex to explain, which is already a problem for something like this.
All right. Anybody have other questions that they want to ask? Dave, are you?
Yeah, just a quick question, more process question.
Sure.
I wanted to confirm the date when you wanted comments, and then I assume that this is exploratory and that no decision has been made necessarily to go forward with legislation or further action. Do I have that understanding correct?
So, yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that something will come out of this that we can use as a tool, because I feel like it will kind of close the gap on where I feel like there is still an issue that that goes beyond current actuarial practice and what we are trying to do here in the department to address this issue. But yeah, there's certainly we don't have draft legislation yet. We'll continue to see if we can work out the details of this, and hopefully the comments will lead us to that. But if it turns out not to work, then we certainly won't go forward with it. But I'm hopeful that it will, and as I personally have goals to try to move this along as much as I can by the end of this year-ish. So I'm going to do everything I can to move it and all the other items that we're looking at by the end of this year. ish. So, but yeah, there we are. So in terms of when comments are, the revised comment date, I will, what do y'all want? Dave, you asked the question, how much additional time do you need? Just don't tell me till next January, because that's not gonna work.
Yeah, I was thinking
Yeah.
January. I was thinking January 29th, Philip.
Oh, I don't know. I think we'd like to, review what we've heard today and check again with, with members and with outside actuarial assistance. So, certainly we're talking a number of weeks.
A number of weeks. So, all right. How about the end of the month? That's today's the 5th. That gives you, I don't know what the last, somebody with the calendar handy, is the 30th a weekday?
Yeah, it's a Tuesday.
Okay, Tuesday the 30th.
I'm speaking without knowing that this, the same people who are doing the data call that's due on the 9th are likely going to be working on this. Does that, I mean, this is much more esoteric than the data call, so I don't know that those things should be related, but there's only so many people in each company's department, so.
Well, I presume the people who would be drafting comments on this are not the same ones pulling the data for the data column.
It will not be the same people, I don't think. No.
So I don't know that. I mean, we want, as we've done from the beginning in this process, I'm trying to do this in as open and transparent a process as possible. We want your comments. We appreciate your comments. The comments that we got for the data call and the telematics have been very helpful. I think this has been a good working process for us, and if we certainly, as David said, we haven't not. I'm committed to seeing this through to the end of the process and have that lead us where it leads us. If anybody has suggestions for other ways to accomplish what we're trying to do, we're open to that too. That's certainly how this process started. It's what we originally started years ago in the department is certainly not like what we have now. So we're open to making changes but
I guess we were hoping something like mid-July, maybe.
So how about the end of this month? I mean, you've had lots of time. I mean, we've had this. I'll stick with the end of this month. If you get to the end of this month and you tell us you need a little bit more time, I'm not going to ignore whatever comments you have as a result of that. But again, I've got deadlines. I've got deadlines that I that I need to get this stuff moving on. So I certainly want to keep this moving. And just to be perfectly clear for everybody, just in case if there is anybody in the world who doesn't know this yet, January 29th is my last day in the department. So my intent is to get as much of this done as I can while I'm still an employee.
feels like a threat. It feels like a threat. It just.
Phil, if you don't mind, I have like one more thought that I think is kind of in response to Tyson, but also maybe helpful to other people in this call.
Sure.
Just to think through, like, you know, we don't need a balancing test. Like, you know, the balancing test is supposed to be helpful to insurers. The idea is like we could have a definition of a premium race gap, or however we want to call it, and then insurers could be, you know, they could ignore it, or maybe they wouldn't ignore it if Disney asked them not to ignore it. So maybe they would actually start caring about it. Maybe they'd really start caring about it, like how it's defined. And then they'd want to like introduce more, hey, you should be accounting for this, this, and this too. And then it would go into some kind of process of deciding, should we add another factor beyond what we've already decided to add? And then the imagining it was kind of like a legislative question, or even like a question that would be something like before a judge. The judge would say, well, what's your evidence that this is a reasonable factor to be adding? And then the person would say, well, on the one hand, you know, this factor tells us a lot about risk. And on the other hand, it's not that correlated to race. I mean, there'd have to be two, you know, there would have to be a way to describe the balance on both sides of why this factor should be included in the definition. And the whole point of the balancing test is to sort of figure out what that process would look like before having to go through that process separately each time a factor is introduced. So like, I just want to make sure that the spirit is understood as a way to try to be helpful to the future modifications of the definition of the premium race gap. It's just, and maybe, you know, it's hard to do that in advance. It's hard to anticipate an entire process like that. But that's the spirit of the balancing test. It's not trying to be complicated. It's trying to say like, oh, if you think you have a new factor that should be, you know, accounted for in the premium race gap, make your case. And here's the balancing test that's helping you to make your case. Sorry, I hope that was helpful.
And I think it does. And I mean, as best I understand on this, you know, I think this does allow us to take into consideration the existing issue where, again, the claims, you know, the claims by race are not the same. And you know, I mean, in my ideal world, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we do everything that we can to make sure that the claims differences go away. And as that happens, it feels like you're going to need something to make sure that that is appropriately reflected in rates. And you know, this kind of tool, I think, at least as far as I can tell, helps to do that.
Anyway, thank you for the conversations, guys, and happy to respond to your questions if you have more.
Right. If
at the end of June.
Yeah. And yes, if anybody has any other things they would like to discuss with either Kathy or the department, we'll certainly be happy to set up a time to discuss that. Because again, you know, I thank Tom for suggesting this the first time we had an exposure, because I think allowing people to submit comments has helped us get, or ask questions has helped us to get a lot better comments than, because it takes some of the confusion out.
Ooh, if you do time the comment deadline for June 30th, I think that, isn't that the 4-year anniversary of our first hearing on this? I think it is.
Is it?
Well, I know because I did not take over this role until July 1st, but I needed to do that call because my predecessor was on a cruise. So it was definitely the end of June. It's either the 28th or the 30th, but.
So Nancy asked the question about posting the video from this. Mainly, I recorded this so that we can get the information to make sure we captured everything. I don't know that we post all of these. I know we post the regular IAC meetings. If we can look into. I guess if we post the subcommittee meeting, I'd have to check and see. But if we do, we'll post this the same place where we post the IAC meetings. And I just have to go back and look and see if we've been doing that.
I do that, Phil, because we have an outside consultant actuary, and it would be helpful for him to review some of the discussion between AAA and Kathy. So, you know, that's sort of like over our heads in so many ways. So.
If we don't post it formally, I'm happy to share it with you. I'm happy to share it with your consultant if they want to. But since you want it, we'll probably post it with the IAC stuff.
That would be great.
Actually, I'll take that back. We'll probably post it on the page where we post all the other information about the unintentional bias. That'll be the easiest place to spot them. So we'll post it there.
Okay, great. Yeah, because you have that on there about the meeting, so that'd be perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Nancy, if your actuary would like to reach out to me to discuss, I'm happy to also do that as well.
Thanks,
I think you should be able to see my email address in the invite here.
I don't know if I see it, but
Nancy, if you have trouble, you can. I'm sure you have my email address, and I can.
Yeah, ask Phil. He's got me. Yep.
Yeah, exactly, Tyson. Or I can ask Lauren, because aren't you? I think you're with State Farm, right? Or
I use my personal email address for this, but it's a Gmail.
Oh, okay. All right, great. All right, yeah. So if I could get it, that'd be great.
trmore84@gmail.com. Maybe you flip that part out if you post it online.
How about if I just post mine? Wouldn't that be easier?
Social security number. What else?
Yeah.
All right.
All right, it's up there now. If you just want to copy and send us an email, that would be great. Thanks.
Yep, sounds good.
Fawn, did you have a question?
Yeah, Phil. When is the going away party?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think the celebration is the day after I'm gone, but
bottles are popping on noon, January the 29th, right?
Yeah.
Well, you've been you're great to work with, and I didn't know you were leaving, so congratulations, sir.
Thank you. Still got a little ways to go, so time to make a lot more progress on this stuff. All right. If nobody has anything else,
So what does the next written product on your end look like? Would here's an algorithm, run with it, or obviously that's not the case.
On the balancing test specifically?
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, we will get the comments. I think the first part is to see if we have a clear understanding of after incorporating all the comments, if we are confident that we know what we are. Then we know what we're doing, then probably the next step would be to propose legislation that incorporates that. But it could be that we get this and we decide we need another round of questions and comments before we get to that point. So, so for this one, we will, that's what it'll be. We'll either come back with more questions and things for discussion, or we will, if we're comfortable that we know everything that we need to know, then probably it'll be proposed legislation with associated materials. And if that's it for, and again, feel free to reach out to me. You know, I want to continue to be as providing as much information as possible on this. But thanks everybody, and you know, look for stuff on the on our website.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Stop recording.